just do.
Is Genshin Impact easy to understand? At its base level, yes. You have 7 different elements that can make reactions with each other, which all benefit you. To a lot of players, this is all they need to know. After all, Genshin Impact isn't an open-world combat game, it's a waifu game. But what about your players that enjoy combat to the deepest depths of the abyss? How do you make something complex without removing its core simplicity? While elemental reactions are all beneficial, not all elemental reactions are made equally. The first step to the core is adding depth to each reaction. Some reactions are generally better than others, and teams are usually built around 1 or 2 reactions. Understanding what each reaction does can come naturally with just playtime, but specifics like transformative versus amplifying reactions can be difficult to discover individually. Transformative reactions deal an additive, flat amount of damage determined by your character level and elemental mastery. Amplifying reactions add a multiplier to your damage, and are thus affected by character level, elemental mastery, crit, and attack percent. Usually, transformative reactions have an additional effect to them. Swirl spreads an element around, Overload deals knockback, and Superconduct decreases physical resistance. These are all things you could figure out by yourself, but unless you actually have a focus on the combat, you probably won't notice or care that much. Speaking of resistance, while it may seem intuitive to not use Pyro against a Pyro slime, the game extends that knowledge and discourages you from using Pyro against a Pyro Fatui agent. Every enemy has an inherent resistance to them, and specific things like Eula's E or Xiangling C1 can decrease an enemy's resistance. This is a hidden mechanic, as there's no real way to know what an enemy's resistance is without knowing beforehand. The entire resistance system is hidden away from the casual player, and while it still very much affects them, it can be overcome with just brute force and time. So if they don't notice it, then it doesn't affect their enjoyment of the game, whereas competitive players will love the additional optimization. Another hidden mechanic is ICD, again, another system that can be overcome with just brute force. ICD, or sometimes just referred to as elemental application, is especially useful when preparing for enemies with elemental shields. Elemental application is independent of attack, crit, elemental mastery, and all of that stuff. A level 1 child can be more optimal than a level 90 Furina, purely for the sake of destroying pyro shields. ICD generally has 2 rules. 1, you can't go 3 hits without applying an element, and 2, you can't go more than 2.5 seconds without applying an element. Some specific abilities have slightly different numbers, like Child's Riptide effect, but generally those 2 rules apply to most characters. All of these ideas stem off of one central idea, which are the 7 elements. What Genshin does is take core mechanics and add depth to them, as opposed to adding dozens of linear mechanics. The elemental burst system is simple, but has a lot of advanced techniques, such as using your burst as energy particles are flying towards you. Sprinting and dodging are condensed into the same system as well. All of these things, at their core, are simple. A casual player doesn't need to know about things like ICD, or things I didn't even mention like elemental gauge theory. Knowing these things doesn't increase their enjoyment of the game, since they might not like the core competitiveness of actually collecting stars in the Spiral Abyss. There's a phenomenon called information overload, where if you're presented with too much information about something, it can make decisions more difficult and unenjoyable. Strangely enough, the lack of tutorials helps Genshin's player base diversify itself, reaching a very large audience. Whether you love the Spiral Abyss or hate it, it can be hard to imagine people with differing opinions than you. If you ever find yourself wondering just how diverse the Genshin player base is, just remember that some people play just because of the teapot. Seriously, who uses this thing still?